The door to the cabinet room closed with a soft latch that sounded final enough to halt the whispering. Keir Starmer rested both palms on the worn edge of the table. Mortzbaum was both bites by both tees, eyes on the muted market feed pulsing on a wall screen. Friday's shock had smashed through the indices and left brokers breathless over the weekend. He let the silence sit. A slow tap came from a pen somewhere to his left, then stopped. "It's not a pause," the energy advisor said, sliding a thin fold of paper across the grain. "It's a lever." The paper had 3 lines that mattered. Maintenance in the North Sea longer than forecast, interconnector capacity clipped, a cold front creeping down. One line in the legal note below was underlined twice. Emergency export prioritization under Clause 14b. He did not look up right away. The radiator ticked behind him like a metronome. "If we pull it," he said, "we own the winter." "Or the blame," came a voice by the door. He nodded, once. The room shifted with the scrape of a chair leg. He could feel how tight the options had become. His aides knew the calculation. Domestic bills, steel plants running thin, a fragile promise that prices would not spike again. Across the channel, a different arithmetic. By Monday morning, the consular amp had the same weather charts, the same maintenance notices, and a thicker stack of calls from industry. The chancellor's coat hung damp by the window. A dark arc of rain smeared across the glass behind him. Olaf Scholz read the note twice, then set it beside a file stamped Energieversorgung, winter. The index fell by 4% on energy-heavy shares, his chief of staff said, voice too flat to be casual. He moved the file with the back of his knuckles. "You say levers?" he said to the room. "I show dependence." A map of power flows lit up on the opposite wall, arrows and percentages that reduced factories to lines. A finger traced the path of current under the sea. Grid operators had flagged vulnerabilities after one cable went dark for 9 days last year. This winter would not forgive softness. The chancellor listened as his minister explained the legal pathways in the network codes. He asked 2 questions. Both were about timing. "Get me London," he said. "No cameras." The midweek call began without pleasantries. There was no need. 2 voices, each recorded by teams seated just off the frame, felt their way along the edge of a cliff neither wanted to name out loud. "We are preparing contingency measures," Starmer said. "We will not apologize for planning." "Planning," Scholz repeated, the word losing shape in the line's slight delay. "You are preparing to cut exports in a cold snap. If you move, our industry pays twice. It's not punitive, it's statutory. Clause 14b exists for this." "You say statute," Scholz said. "I show solidarity mechanisms. If we are to share, then we share rules," Starmer replied. "Fast-track mutual access to balancing markets on equal terms, or ease your new levy that bites our manufacturers while you call for unity." The pause was long enough to hear the faint hiss of audio gain. Advisors leaned in, then back. The chancellor's tone tightened by a degree. "If you make our grid hostage," he said, "we answer with law, not fury." "Then put it in writing," Starmer said. "We both do." No one smiled when the line went quiet. They knew what words could not carry. In London, an aide closed a laptop with a decisive snap. In Berlin, a hand rested on a folder a moment longer than necessary. A week later, a headline hit Brussels before dawn. It named a cabinet office memo and used the words no one wanted printed. Blackout protocol. Expressbridge of work was Stammerfort. Were Stammerf the word covered with burst ways for one print. Were Startsibori export prioritization. A cropped image of a timetable showed a 72-hour trigger before restrictions. Screens lit up in trading floors from Frankfurt to Paris. Prices jumped before commuters finished their first coffee. The commission called signals and sounded constructive. The chancellor's office said firmness without heat. In Westminster, statements were precise and bland, built to slide. Yet the memo's existence did a simpler thing. It made the worst assumption feel reasonable. The air on the 8th floor of an energy firm in the city felt charged, like the pause before a storm breaks. Traders watched the color of the numbers. Few spoke. In the Bundestag, the economics minister faced a committee that fed on verbs: guarantee, prevent, sanction. Each question ran through the same funnel toward one demand: assurances on winter supply. The minister kept to lines approved hours before, pausing for water to regulate cadence. Outside, a crowd from an industrial union held placards that did not mention London at all. They asked for continuity. They counted shifts, not points on a graph. The real work moved in rooms without microphones. In a low building near the Parc du Cinquantenaire, A British official met a German emissary at a table whose surface had borne too many urgent elbows. Neither took off their coat. Documents moved across the wood face down. A service cart rattled past in the corridor, the sound oddly human in the labored quiet. "You want a letter?" the British official said, tapping the envelope's edge. "We want access that closes the spread, not language that flatters. If you squeeze us with a clause," the emissary said, "we activate ours. Network penalties on non-cooperative third countries. It is dry law, but it cuts." "It cuts both ways," came the reply. "One of your grid subsidiaries enjoys a generous licensing regime in the Midlands. Regimes change." They both knew what it meant. Legal, targeted, and deniable in public. If leveraged, it could shift billions of euros in asset pricing without a speech. They were talking about pressure framed as procedure. The emissary's mouth tightened. The British official's fingers stilled. By the end of the month, the public language had grown more careful, and the private minutes more pointed. Pollsters leaked numbers that could be read three ways. Energy companies issued updates heavy with verbs like optimize and rebalance. In a conference hotel outside The Hague, mid-tier ministers tried to mend a fabric that had frayed in 6 places at once. On the second evening, someone laughed too loudly in a lobby bar. Everyone looked up, then pretended not to. In Downing Street, the Prime Minister stood by the window in a lighter room with newer chairs. He studied the thin white edge where the curtain met the wall. He had a letter to sign that would not calm anyone, and a briefing on industrial stability that politely disguised its own warnings. The clock on the mantel ticked over to mark an hour no one would remember. He turned back to the table. "Bring me the operational plan," he said. "Not the talking points. The plan." He read through a section detailing tests of response time under different frost scenarios. The language was clean. The implications were not. He marked a paragraph, uncapped a pen, then capped it again without writing. One call would follow another. Each would be harder to make than the last. In Berlin, Scholz walked the length of the narrow garden behind his office, hands clasped behind his back, coat collar up against a light wind. He was not theatrical when he was angry. He became meticulous. A trimmed hedge ran straight as a ruler. He preferred lines when circles would not do. He stopped once, glanced at the building's lit windows, and resumed his pace. He would call Paris next, then Warsaw. Order mattered. He would make it matter. Late on a Thursday, a producer in a newsroom found a padded envelope propped against his chair. No return address. Inside, a stack of photocopies in black and white, clipped at the top left. The first page was a flight manifest. The second was an internal meeting note. The third showed a page of trade positions opened across a narrow window of time. He read and reread the times. He reached for the phone, then stopped, the handset hovering. The log showed a fund partner meeting a government aide at 1942 on a night the memo did not yet officially exist. The newsroom lights hummed with a low, even sound, the kind that made people talk more quietly than they meant to. The producer laid the photocopies in a neat fan across the desk, corners aligned. A flight manifest with 2 names, a calendar entry with a room that did not appear on the official floor plan, and a sheet of trades clustered within a narrow band of the evening. The legal editor read in silence, then placed a fingertip on the 1942 line, as if it might smudge. "Confirm the room," the editor said, "and call the fund. Word-for-word comment request. No adjectives." Down the corridor, a reporter dialed and listened to a ringtone that kept its distance. When it clicked over to a recorded voice, he tried, again with a different number. On the third attempt, a receptionist placed him on hold. He watched the dots move on his screen. Typing, then gone, then back. In Berlin, the minister's conference room had the faint scent of citrus from a recent wipe-down, clean enough to feel deliberate. Robert Habeck sat with a stack of folders and 3 pages flagged in pale blue. Scholz listened, elbows on the armrests, the angle of his shoulders at odds with the neutral tone he kept for moments like this. "Industry wants a capacity guarantee announced before month's end," Habeck said. "They don't care if it's framed as solidarity or stability, as long as they can plan. If London pulls 14B, we respond with network fees calibrated to discourage asymmetry." Scholz's eyes rested on a point beyond the table. "You say calibration," he said. "I show consequences." A notepad slid forward. The line read, "Penalties under Article 16 coordination, staged over 2 phases. It was, on paper, impersonal. In practice, it would cut into companies with addresses and payrolls." 2 weeks passed before the first public clash. It arrived in Brussels at an energy council that had begun as routine and then changed shape as ministers' schedules bent toward it. Keir Starmer's remarks were measured in a way that warned without raising his voice. Haybeck, on the outer ring of chairs, looked as if he had not slept long enough, but his words came precise. "It's not a threat," Starmer said by the cameras. "It's contingency. We will protect households and jobs. Reciprocity is not hostility." Haybeck did not wait to be asked. "Solidarity is not a slogan," he said. "Shared rules are not selective." Inside the building, the glass-paneled corridor absorbed and softened the sound. A British aide held a scuffed leather folder against his side, the edge worn white. A German advisor pointed to a timetable open on a tablet, the green blocks tight until mid-January. They spoke in clipped phrases about flows and windows. The line between technical and political thinned in the air and then vanished entirely. In London, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero had that peculiar mid-afternoon lull where everything feels 10 minutes late. Ed Miliband closed the last page of a briefing and looked up at the wall clock. Ofgem had sent a draft notice, intent to review the license conditions of a German-owned grid subsidiary operating in the Midlands. He ran a thumb along the paper's edge and set it down without stacking it under anything else. "If we sign this," he said to the room, "it needs to be obvious we're protecting competition, not playing flags." "Make the reasoning procedural," an aide said. "Structure, not origin." He nodded. The click of a pen cap sounded louder than it should. In a glass tower in the city, a compliance officer stood before a whiteboard streaked with marker residue. A partner shifted his weight from one foot to the other, tie not a fraction looser than in the morning. Trades clustered between 1939 and 1948. The compliance officer said, "If a journalist has timestamps and a meeting we didn't declare, this is not a conversation, this is preservation." The partner's jaw worked once. "We did nothing with inside knowledge," he said. "We followed public signals and weather data. If a memo existed, we didn't see it." "Then show your sources," she said. "Screens, alerts, emails. If you don't have the trail, you're building a fire without smoke." She turned to the board and underlined the date. The squeak of the marker sounded like a small admonition. In Bonn, the Bundesnetzagenters building had high ceilings and the quiet of a library, not a battlefield. A conference room filled, not with politicians, but with grid operators, lawyers, and two liaisons who wore their agencies like uniforms. Ofgem on one side, BNet's A on the other. The screen was split between a schematic of the North Sea interconnector and a calendar. A maintenance window was colored in with a discrete shade of orange. "We need to move this 8 days earlier," the German operator said. "We cannot risk an unscheduled outage when the high pressure sits over the continent." "It's not a risk," the British operator replied. "It's planned. Our demand peak is front-loaded. Pulling it forward pinches our early balance and pushes price into steel and glass." A Binetza lawyer tapped a clause with a calm finger. "Emergency coordination procedures are not decorative," she said. "They exist precisely for this case." The Ofgem liaison leaned in, and they require joint determination, not unilateral demand. You can request. You cannot compel. The room's heat was the dry kind that comes from servers behind walls. Water glasses gathered tiny beads that slid and left tracks. The moderator, a man whose tie was perfectly centered, suggested a pause. They broke apart for 12 minutes. In the hallway, the British operator took a call and listened without speaking, eyes on the floor. When they returned, they agreed on nothing essential. Germany filed for urgent coordination at NTSOE. The UK signaled it would hold the slot unless a documented risk crossed a threshold not yet met. The result was as clean as a stalemate can be. It left both sides with something to act on. By the end of the month, pollsters circulated a slide deck showing rising concern about energy costs in two capitals. Not panic, not yet. In Paris, the Élysées antennae twitched at the edges of a potential split. In Warsaw, the language sharpened by a degree. In Rotterdam, a port scheduler watched the orders from a steel mill slip by a day, then two. The newsroom called back. The fund's general counsel answered this time, voice composed to the point of impersonality. He provided a 3-sentence statement that said nothing wrong and conceded nothing at all. The reporter wrote it down verbatim, then looked at the empty space at the bottom of his page. "Do we have the room?" the editor asked. "We have the room," the reporter said. "We have a staff member who says they saw them enter, but they won't go on record." "We don't run it on a ghost," the editor said. "Get me a second source, or a timestamp we can verify without them." In Downing Street, Starmer read a draft of a letter addressed not to Berlin but to the Commission, language threaded with restraint. Reciprocal balancing access, pre-announced thresholds, a mutual notification protocol that would make 14B less like a hammer and more like a valve. He pushed the draft away and picked up a different sheet. Operational stress tests, stepwise contingencies, the practical, unbeautiful part of governing. He called Miliband and listened as the minister laid out the arguments for and against signing the Ovjim review notice now. The choice was not between escalation and peace, but between two routes up the same hill at different gradients. If we wait until after the council's working group meets, Miliband said, we look careful. If we move now, we look prepared. Prepared can read as provoked, Starmer said. Hold until Monday and make sure the rationale is a template we can live with. Scholz walked back into his office, the late sun making the glass a flat mirror that showed him rather than the city. He had a call with Paris in 9 minutes and a note from his finance minister that used the word cushion twice. He disliked that word. He would ask for the sums again and for the distribution by sector. He had told himself not to ask twice unless something had changed. Something had changed. The interconnector meeting had ended without a bridge. In a small studio 2 floors above the newsroom, the anchor rehearsed the first line twice. Twice, then once more. She sipped water that had gone warm. The producer watched the seconds count down in red. The package sat in the system under a working title that no one had had time to change. In a corner, a junior staffer clicked a nervous rhythm into a keyboard with a key that stuck. At the fund, a courier signed in with a padded envelope bearing the regulator's crest. The receptionist's pen left a small blot of ink on the ledger. Upstairs, the partner peeled back the flap and read a data preservation notice that was cold as steel, each sentence balanced like a scale. In Brussels, a commission official scrolled a draft of a guidance note that walked the tightrope of neutrality with a dancer's concentration. In Bonn, a clerk stamped a filing with a broad, flat sound. In London, the Ovjim liaison reread her own email twice without changing a word. The studio's red light came on. The music rose, then fell away. The anchor looked into the lens and spoke with a clarity that admitted no drama. Tonight, she said, we begin with a meeting that the public record does not contain. The studio's output fed into screens across newsrooms and homes, the anchor's voice steady as she described the undeclared meeting. By morning, the story had legs. A fund partner's schedule aligning with a government aide's in a room off the official ledger, trades that timed like a heartbeat to the memo's shadow. In the city, compliance teams worked through the night, but the damage settled like frost, questions without answers, trust thinning by the hour. A week later, in a conference suite overlooking the Thames, Ed Miliband faced a select committee whose members leaned forward with the kind of focus that promised transcripts. The chair, a woman with a stack of printouts at her elbow, opened with the flight manifest, its photocopied ink slightly blurred. Minister, she said, this shows a meeting at 1942. The memo's draft was circulating by 2015. Did your department brief private interests on export priorities before cabinet approval? Miliband's fingers rested flat on the table, unmoving. No briefing occurred, he said. Public data on maintenance and weather was available. Markets react to signals, not secrets. She slid a page forward. These trades netted £2.3 million in a 9-minute window. Coincidence? It's not insider action, he replied. It's efficiency. If we investigate every correlation, we paralyze commerce. The room held its breath. A reporter in the gallery shifted, the creak of wood cutting the quiet. Miliband's aide passed a note. Legal review ongoing. No breach found. He did not look at it. The chair's eyes narrowed. We'll subpoena the logs, she said, and the room's access records. In Berlin, Olaf Scholz's office had traded its garden view for a larger map room, walls lined with screens showing grid flows in real time. Robert Habeck entered with a folder under his arm, its edges crisp. Scholz gestured to a chair without rising. The leak, Habeck said, opening the folder. It traces to a junior in the energy department. He claims a tip from London contacts, but the trades point to British funds. Scholz's gaze stayed on the screen, where a line dipped, a minor outage in the roar. You say tip, he said. I show pattern. Habeck laid out 3 documents, an old interconnector agreement from 2022, clauses on emergency flows buried in annexes, a subsidy ledger showing 1.2 billion euros funneled to German firms via EU funds, with strings tied to UK exports, and a leaked email chain from Ovgem, dated weeks before the memo, discussing priority calibration with industry reps. This changes the frame, Habeck said. They positioned first. We revealed the subsidies as leverage. Our industry hit hardest by their cuts, yet we propped their grid. Scholz tapped the subsidy page once. Make it public through the commission. Frame it as transparency, not retaliation. 2 weeks passed, marked by frosty mornings and shorter days. The committee's subpoena landed in Miliband's inbox like a stone in still. Water. He read it in a car en route to a bilateral with French counterparts, the driver's turn signal clicking in rhythm. Back in Whitehall, aides drafted responses, but the air carried a new weight, reporters circling, opposition benches sharpening their questions. In Brussels, the Commission's press room filled with journalists whose questions layered like sediment. A spokesperson, tie straight as a rule, addressed the subsidy revelations first. Habeck had briefed them hours before. The documents digitized and shared under a cooperation review heading. These figures, the spokesperson said, highlight imbalances in cross-border support. Germany's contributions to shared infrastructure totaled 1.2 billion euros over 3 years, while UK export policies now risk asymmetric burdens. A hand shot up from the front row. Is this a call for repayment? Not repayment, came the reply. Recalibration. The EU stands for equitable energy markets. Outside, in the marble-floored atrium, a German diplomat met a British counterpart near a fountain that trickled softly. The Brit carried a slim tablet. The German, a printout of the email chain. Your leak, the German said, voice low. It boomeranged. The Brit's smile did not reach his eyes. Transparency cuts both ways. Those subsidies? They were for joint projects. Pull them and your wind farm's idle. If you weaponize 14B, the German replied, we audit every euro, starting with your grid subsidiaries' tax breaks, worth 450 million annually. They parted without handshakes. The fountain's sound followed them down separate corridors. In London, Starmer convened a smaller group in an anteroom off the cabinet office, the walls paneled in dark wood that absorbed light. Miliband sat to his right, a fresh briefing in hand. The Prime Minister scanned the subsidy breakdown, then set it down. They've turned our contingency into their grievance, Starmer said. The Commission echoes it. Public mood shifts. Polls show 58% favoring EU alignment over isolation. Miliband nodded. We counter with our contributions. 15% of Europe's LNG imports last winter routed through us. But if they push audits, it exposes the old deals, favorable terms we granted post-Brexit. A knock interrupted. An aide entered with a tablet, screen glowing. Chancellor Scholz's office just released the full ledger. It's trending. Industry unions in the Ruhr are mobilizing. Starmer's jaw tightened. He stood and crossed to the window, where rain streaked the glass in uneven lines. Below, protesters gathered near Parliament, signs calling for fair flows, not favors. Their chants rose faintly, muffled by the pain. Prepare a response, he said. Highlight the mutual benefits, and get legal on those audits. Stall if we must. By month's end, secondary players emerged from the wings. In Paris, Emmanuel Macron's team signaled interest in mediating, their own grids intertwined. Warsaw's foreign minister issued a statement on continental solidarity, eyes on Berlin's lead. In the Bundestag, opposition voices demanded a special session on the subsidies, framing it as a test of EU loyalty. The Ruhr Valley felt the ripple first. A steel plant manager addressed workers in a canteen that smelled of machine oil and reheated soup. Our lines run on those funds, he said. If London pulls exports, we lose 20% capacity. That shift's gone. Families waiting. The crowd murmured. One man in the back stood. Then we push back. Make them see the cost. In a Frankfurt boardroom, executives from a grid operator reviewed the audit threats, projections scrolling on a wall display. Losses modeled at 800 million if penalties stuck. Factories dimmed, exports rerouted. The CEO closed the laptop with a snap. Contact our London subsidiary, he said. Full compliance mode, and brief the lawyers on divestment options. The room emptied slowly, chairs pushed back with deliberate care. In Downing Street, the evening briefing turned to the union's rally. Starmer listened as an aide outlined the optics. German workers as victims, British policy as aggressor. He rubbed his temple once, then straightened. Reach out to Scholz directly, he said. Not through channels. Propose a joint statement on shared risks. Buy time. The call connected at 22:17. Scholz's voice came clear, unhurried. Prime Minister, he said, your memo started this. Our documents end the imbalance. It's not ending, Starmer replied. It's evolving. We both lose if grids fracture. You say evolve, Scholz said. I say account. The line held for a beat. In the background, a door clicked shut somewhere in Berlin. A junior aide in the chancellery, the one who leaked the tip, waited in a side office for his superior. The room was spare. A desk, 2 chairs, a lamp casting long shadows. He had printed his own copy of the subsidy ledger, margins filled with notes. When the door opened, he stood. "I have more," he said. "From the old files. It ties their aid to our funds directly." The superior's eyes sharpened. "Show me." As the aide spread the pages, a phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number, London prefix. All described events are fictional. The superior picked up on the second buzz. The junior aide stood still, hands flat on a folder, as a clipped London voice offered a clarification meeting at a quiet cafe near the Tiergarten. The call was smooth, practiced. The superior let it run long enough to hear the conditions, then ended it with a neutral thanks and no commitment. When the line died, the room settled back into the hush of a building after hours. A tram bell sounded faintly through double glazing. "You're not going," the superior said. "We'll bring them to us, and we won't be alone." 2 days later, a plain conference room at the British Embassy in Berlin wore its neutrality like a uniform. A pot of tea gave off gentle steam. The junior aide entered with a small notebook and no bag, as instructed. Across the table, a mid-ranking official from London smiled without warmth and set down a phone face down. "It's not pressure," the official began. "It's clarity. If there is confusion around your documents, we can ensure context before it becomes noise." "You say context," the junior replied. "I show logs." He slid a single page across the table. An access record for a room on a particular evening. The official did not touch it. "You've been busy," the official said. "If you've crossed a line, you need counsel, not conversation." The air shifted when the door opened. 2 men stepped in, badges displayed, Germany's federal police and a prosecutor from the anti-corruption unit. The British official's smile thinned to nothing. The junior aide didn't move. The superior, unseen in an adjoining room, watched through a glass that showed only the official's reflection back to himself. "This is a voluntary interview," the prosecutor said. "You're free to leave. If you stay, we will ask about your contact with financial entities on the night in question." The official placed the phone on the table, screen still dark. "No questions without legal representation," he said evenly, "and no assumptions about jurisdiction." The prosecutor nodded once. "Then we note your refusal." The room emptied with the measured rhythm of a chessboard cleared piece by piece. No one raised a voice. The tea cooled untouched. A week later in London, the corridor outside the committee room smelled faintly of wet wool as coats dripped onto stands. Ed Miliband paused before entering, a short note in his palm. "Council advises compliance delivered on schedule, no voluntary expansion." He slipped the paper into a pocket and walked to the table, where microphones waited like small sentries. "Minister," the chair began, "we've received additional logs confirming that room. We now require device records from your department's aide on the date specified." "We are cooperating," Miliband said, voice level. "We've initiated an internal review. The aide in question is on leave pending findings." "Leave," she repeated. "Not suspension." "Leave while we examine facts," he said. "If misconduct is found, consequences follow." "You say review," she said. "I say delay." Outside, a rain squall moved across the river, scudding the surface into a darker texture. An aide texted a single line to Downing Street. Subpoena widened. In an upper office, a press officer rubbed at a mark on a desk with a sleeve, glanced at the clock, and picked up the phone. By mid-month, Paris offered itself as a bridge. The Élysée arranged a trilateral in a long room with pale walls and high windows that reflected a winter sky. The seating was formal enough to require careful posture, informal enough to allow a human moment if one arrived. It did not. Keir Starmer spoke first, laying out the draft. Mechanism that would turn blunt emergency powers into something with graduated steps. Olaf Scholz listened, eyes on the document but attention on the argument under it. Emmanuel Macron's team moderated with phrases chosen for glide rather than friction. "It's not concession," Starmer said softly. "It's a valve. It protects both of us from our worst instincts and our worst weather." Scholz tapped the margin with a forefinger. "You built your draft on trust you have already priced," he said. "You ask us to underwrite your clause while we absorb the cost." Macron's counselor interjected with a cool tone. "If the mechanism carries audit rights on both sides, it can anchor trust." "Audit is not a weapon," Scholz said. "It is a ledger." "Then we publish the entries," Starmer replied. "All of them." A pause lengthened. Outside, a scooter's engine rose and fell on the street. The cool of the room settled into bone. They broke for briefings. Side rooms hummed with quiet urgency. In one, a German advisor held a sheaf of papers that looked heavier than paper should. In another, a British aide stared at a blank message field, thumbs idle above glass. No one found a new sentence that could reframe the old facts. When they returned to the table, they settled for a joint line about ongoing work and mutual commitments. It read like the scaffolding of a house no one had decided to build. In Frankfurt, Boffin's 7th floor filled with the subdued energy of a day that had been telegraphed for days. The regulator's notice to the fund was ready. It was precise, civil, and edged. Across the channel, the Financial Conduct Authority's team prepared its own papers, less lyrical, more blunt. The SFO moved boxes into a conference room and labeled them with neat handwriting. Preparation tends to sound the same in every country: wheels of trolleys, low voices, printers that spit without fanfare. At dawn, coordinated steps sounded on a lobby floor in the city. The fund's receptionist recognized something in the walk and held her breath without knowing why. The warrants came out in quiet hands. Inside, a partner raised his head from a spreadsheet that had rows arranged like a field before harvest. He rapped the desk once with knuckles and nodded. "You'll have everything we have," he said to the lead officer. "We are not obstructing." "You are preserving," she replied. "Preservation is not an admission." "It's an instruction," she said. In Berlin, a television in a corner office showed silent footage of cardboard crates and the shuffle of feet. Robert Habeck turned from the screen to Scholz. "They move on their own," Habeck said. "Good. It makes space for us to move on ours." "Boffin first," Scholz said. "Then the Commission." The German regulator filed. The European institution followed with phrases that could carry two meanings at once without stumbling. In Bonn, Binetze's people met again with Ovjim's by-screen, faces pale in the glow. The interconnector schedule glared back at them from pixels. The maintenance slot still a wedge of color no diplomacy could soften. In Brussels, a newsroom producer received an email without body text, only an attachment, a 10-second clip of elevator camera footage. Two men entered, one after the other, in a building attached by corridor to a government office. The timestamp in the corner sat like a small verdict. The legal editor watched it twice, then a third time, and closed the file. "We need the second angle," she said. Stairwell. By late week, demonstrations had taken on a different texture. Not the open-throated anger of the first days, but a tighter, colder determination. In Dortmund, workers marched with measured steps, stamping rhythm into pavement. In Leeds, a small rally held placards that did not spare their own government. The slogans had fewer verbs and more nouns: bills, jobs, heat. In Whitehall, a document lay on Starmer's desk that would put steel around Ovjim's review, a ministerial direction that explained the public interest in proceeding despite foreseeable noise. He read it as if trying to find the one sentence that would make it lighter. There wasn't one. "If we sign," an aide said, "it's escalation with a footnote. If we don't," he said, "we look weak with a footnote." He signed. The pen left a line that glistened for a second before drying to a dull black. That evening, the joint working group meant to cool tempers met in a building behind the commission, where corridors smell faintly of polished stone and paper. British and German liaisons sat opposite and arranged their folders at right angles. The chair spoke in the careful cadence of someone balancing on a narrow beam. "We propose a 3-stage threshold with notifications," the British liaison said. 1. Non-binding advisories. 2. Binding but limited reductions. 3. Full emergency, rare and time-limited. The German liaison drew a small square on her notepad and shaded it. "Without audit, stages are theater," she said. "We require access. Otherwise, we do not believe the thresholds are thresholds, only suggestions." "It's not access," he said. "It's intrusion." "It's not intrusion," she replied. "It's verification." They adjourned without agreement and with the sense that everything had been said correctly and nothing had been heard. Outside, streetlights hit wet pavement and turned it into a series of long, interrupted lines. In the chancellery, the junior aide sat in a smaller room than before. Fluorescent light flattening the edges of his face. The superior placed a recorder on the desk and clicked it on. "Tell it in order," the superior said. "Start with the first email." He spoke in a steady voice, as if distance might keep him safe from his own story. He described a contact from a British aide, months earlier when the weather was still warm. He described the way small talk turns into shapes that look like plans when seen from far enough away. He described a suggestion titled with a gentle word, calibration, that meant something else by the time it reached a fund's terminal. He He described meetings that were never called meetings and rooms that did not appear on maps released to the public. "If this holds," the superior said when he finished, "you will testify." "If I do," the junior said, "I will not go back to work again." "No," the superior said, "you will not." In London, the anchor took her seat and listened to the director's countdown. She looked straight into the lens. Her expression was calm in a way that made the desk in front of her look unsound. "Tonight," she said, "we obtained footage that shows a government aide and a fund partner entering the same secure room before the market moved. On a screen in Downing Street, the same clip ran on a loop, the same corner timestamp, the same doors sliding open and closed. On a screen in the Chancellery, it ran with German captions. In one newsroom, a lawyer stood and pressed 2 fingers to her temple. The second angle arrived in the inbox while the broadcast was still live. The stairwell camera showed the aide's profile as he turned his head at the landing, eyes lifted toward a floor that wasn't his. The stairwell footage played on loop in secure rooms from London to Berlin. The aide's profile a frozen accusation that no denial could thaw. By dawn, resignations cascaded like dominoes toppled by a single touch. The fund partner stepped down first, his statement brief and bloodless. Personal reasons, effective immediately. In Whitehall, the aide followed, a quiet exit framed as leave extended indefinitely. Miliband's office issued a single line. No comment on personnel, full cooperation assured. 2 weeks later, the Élysée hosted the final push in a chamber with velvet drapes that muffled the outside world. Starmer arrived with a revised draft under his arm, its pages marked in red ink where concessions had been carved out. Scholz sat opposite, flanked by Habeck, who carried a tablet loaded with the latest grid projections. Macron presided, his expression a mask of practiced optimism, though his notes showed the fractures. French exports strained, Polish demands rising. "It's not retreat," Starmer said, sliding the draft across the polished oak. "It's architecture. Mutual thresholds for exports, joint audits every quarter, a shared reserve pool funded at 500 million euros annually, split evenly." Scholz scanned the clauses, his finger pausing on the audit provision. "You say shared," he replied. "I see safeguards. Our industries bore the first cuts. This must bind you as tightly." Habeck leaned in, voice low. "The pool covers outages, but only if we harmonize the levies. Yours on our manufacturers ends by spring, or the pool stays dry." Macron nodded once. "We all invest, or none do. France commits 200 million up front if the language holds." The room fell quiet, save for the faint scratch of pens on paper. Outside, a light rain pattered against leaded windows, turning the gardens into a blurred watercolor. Starmer met Scholz's gaze across the table, the weight of months in the space between them. "If we sign," Starmer said, "markets stabilize by week's end. No more shocks." Scholz set the pen down deliberately. "Then we sign." The agreement bore a neutral name, North Sea Energy Accord. It rolled out in phases over the following month, each step announced with the precision of a surgeon's incision. First came the pool's funding, wired through neutral accounts in Luxembourg. Then the levy suspensions, easing 300 million euros in cross-border tariffs. Grid operators synchronized their calendars, shifting maintenance slots by days rather than weeks. In Bonn, Benesse certified the first joint audit, a dry exercise that uncovered no scandals but built a template for the next. Public reaction unfolded in layers. In the Ruhr, union halls emptied as shifts resumed without the shadow of blackout warnings. Polls in the UK showed approval ticking up to 52%, a fragile majority that spoke of relief more than triumph. Berlin's streets saw fewer placards, though whispers lingered about the cost to sovereignty. The Commission hailed it as a model for the energy union, their press release laced with verbs like integrate and fortify. Personal tolls mounted quietly. The junior aide in Berlin testified in a closed session, his voice steady as he detailed the emails and the rooms. He vanished from public view afterward, reassigned to a desk in a provincial office, where winters were longer but the stakes smaller. In London, the aide's replacement lasted 3 months before lateral moves pulled her away. Miliband weathered a no-confidence motion by 3 votes, his speech a masterclass in deflection. Lessons learned, systems strengthened. Habeck pushed a reform bill through the Bundestag, embedding reciprocal clauses into national law. It passed on a Friday evening, the vote tallied under fluorescent lights that hummed like distant approval. Scholz watched from the gallery, his silhouette sharp against the chamber's glow. He had traded fury for framework, but the lines on his face deepened all the same. Starmer faced his own reckoning in a common session that stretched into the night. Opposition benches hurled questions about the pool's cost, $250 million from UK coffers, and the aid's shadow over trust. He stood at the dispatch box, hands gripping the edge until knuckles paled. "We faced a storm," he said. "We built the harbor, if you want blame. Look to the winds that brought it." The speaker called order twice. The motion failed, but the chamber emptied with a murmur that echoed longer than applause. By spring's edge, changes settled into the system's bones. The accord birthed a cross-border agency in Brussels, its charter mandating transparency on flows and funds. UK exports stabilized at 15% above pre-crisis levels. German industries reclaimed lost margins. Macron's mediation earned quiet points in Paris, positioning France as the union's quiet architect. In a final call from Downing Street, Starmer and Scholz spoke without the buffer of aides. The line crackled faintly, a remnant of old infrastructure. "You held firm," Starmer said. "We both did." Scholz paused, the sound of papers shifting in the background. "Firm is not enough. It's the foundation." The connection held a beat longer. When it ended, both men turned to windows overlooking cities that felt a degree less isolated. Power had not shattered. It had realigned, grids woven tighter than before. The countries once pitted in the cold now shared a fragile warmth, one that winter could test but not easily break.